What's up folks, it's CrushSG, and today we're going to explore player damage modifiers and attack bonuses. But before that, for those who watched my previous video, I'll be working on an update video on my player-based damage setup soon. I learned some new interesting things since the last video and have changed things up a little for more damage and more efficiency. Also, I just wanted to say that the point of the last video was not to claim that attack was a better or worse stat to invest into versus any other given stat. Not at all. Attack is just often described as a categorically worthless or useless stat by some, and the point of the video was to simply show that the game provides ways for player-centric attack setups to be viable. Whether you choose to play one way or another, or play the game on easy or hard mode, or even if you choose to crank up all the drop and XP modifiers, it's entirely personal preference at the end of the day. That's one of the great things about Palworld and the amount of control options they provide within the base game itself. You do you. It's a game, not a competition. At least not till PvP comes out anyway. So let's all enjoy this gem of a game the way we want to enjoy it. Anyway, whether investing into attack is worth it or not isn't the focus of today's video. Today I want to talk about some tests I did exploring various aspects of player damage modifiers and attack bonuses. I didn't explore the entire damage formula for this video, just some of the key modifiers and other basic metrics for now. For simplicity and clarity, I'm going to categorize the video the way anyone would categorize an experiment. Let's go over the goals first. My goals for this video were 1. To confirm that damage scales predictably and proportional to attack values so that we can eliminate any potential hidden multipliers or unknown factors from the equation. This will then help determine how accurate the known math is at determining expected damage versus what we actually see in the game, or at least in this experiment, what we see on the target dummy. Goal number 2 is to figure out the exact variance factor in the damage calculation. In my previous video, I listed this as somewhere between plus or minus 10 to 15%. That was an estimate based on anecdotal observation. I want to know what the exact number is. Goal number 3 is to figure out what the base weak point damage multiplier is. This is sometimes referred to as a crit hit or a headshot multiplier. Number 4 is to confirm that all attack bonuses are in fact additive within a single pool. Goal number 5 is to figure out if the weak point damage bonus granted by the Vanwyrm and Robinquill partner skills, is that actually additive or is it a multiplicative bonus? Number 6, to figure out the target dummy's parameters to provide context for future testing on the dummy. And finally, we have a couple of bonus questions just out of my own personal curiosity. First, I wanted to test the difference between running my preferred setup versus the theoretical max damage version of this setup. And second, I wanted to test the damage difference between running an elemental swap mount for the 100% bonus attack versus a Vanwyrm for weak point damage. How close does 40% bonus to weak point damage come to the 100% bonus attack granted by elemental swap mounts? Okay, those were the goals, and onto the test setup. I simply used the legendary handgun on the target dummy. The sample size was 32 shots per scenario. It's a small sample, but it's sufficient for the purposes of this experiment. Aside from the first non-hit shot scenario, all shots in all other scenarios were 100% hit shots for an apples-to-apples comparison with weak point damage. I also used 4-star Gobfins for this test because they boost player attack. I used the 4-star Ragnarok to represent the 100% bonus attack you get from most elemental swap mounts. And for the weak point partner skills, I used a 4-star Robinquill and a 4-star Vanwyrm. All in, I tested 6 different scenarios. The first scenario was non-weak point regular shots. The second scenario was 3 Gobfins as a baseline for my preferred setup, which involves running 3 Gobfins with a Robinquill and a mount in the 5th slot. Scenario 3 involves 3 Gobfins with the Robinquill buff to show the weak point bonus. Scenario 4 features 4 Gobfins as a baseline for the max damage setup, which involves 4 Gobfins and an elemental swap mount. The fifth scenario is 4 Gobfins with the Ragnarok buff to show the bonus attack granted by the elemental swap mount. And the final scenario I tested was 4 Gobfins with the Vanwyrm buff to compare the weak point bonus with the elemental attack bonus. And here are the results. I hit a few rows of shots so that the whole thing would fit onto the screen a bit better. Let's break down the results first, and then we'll get to the conclusion. The first row shows the average damage across all 32 shots for each scenario. The next shows the difference between a hit shot and a regular shot. The hit shots dealt an average of 147% of the regular shot's damage, or in other words, hit shots dealt an average of 47% more damage. Next we have the 3 Gobfin scenarios, and here is the difference between unbuffed shots and shots buffed with the 40% weak point partner skill. The buff shots dealt an average of 44% more damage. Then we have the 4 Gobfin scenarios, and here is the difference between unbuffed shots and shots buffed with the 100% elemental attack bonus. The buff shots dealt an average of 42% more damage. And subsequently, the difference between unbuffed shots and shots buffed with the 40% weak point partner skill showed a difference of 40% damage. Following this, we have the variance figures, which measures the variance between the lowest, the highest, and the average shot damage. Green is the positive variance from the average, red is the negative variance from the average. And then we have some basic data. I have 35 points into attack, so my base attack value is 170. Below this is the total passive attack bonus as calculated by the game, and this is displayed when you hover your mouse over the attack stat. The next row shows the total attack value stated on the stat screen for each scenario. Of course, the weapon damage, a legendary handgun, is 625 damage across the board. Then we have calculated damage, and this is the mathematically projected damage we should expect when hitting a target that is the same level as us, that also has exactly 100 defense, or in the context of how Palworld calculates damage, a defense factor of 1. However you want to look at it, the math works out the same because Palworld uses a simple multiplicative formula for calculations. These numbers are then compared with the average damage figures from each scenario to confirm the parameters of the target dummy. Finally, we have the attack scaling, and this just looks at whether the difference in total attack value in the stat screen corresponds proportionally with the difference in the actual damage dealt to the target. We'll talk about the bonus rolls in the conclusion. And for that, we need to look back at the goals of this experiment. So the first goal was to confirm if damage scaled proportional to attack. And yes, we see that the damage dealt scales proportionally with attack values on the stat screen, the numbers in blue. This means there are no hidden or unknown modifiers to contend with outside of just the attack value, the attack bonuses, and weapon damage. Goal number 2 was to figure out what the variance factor was in the damage calculation, the red and green numbers in the spreadsheet. Now, it's pretty clear from this that with a larger sample size, the numbers are going to converge toward 10%. So we can assume with relatively high confidence that the variance factor in the damage formula is in fact plus or minus 10%. Goal number 3 was to figure out what the weak point multiplier was, and we see a value of 47%. So it is pretty safe to assume that the base bonus damage for weak point hits is 1.5x, or 50% more damage. More meaning it's multiplicative. Goal number 4 was to confirm that all attack bonuses are in fact additive within their own pool, and we see that the total passive bonuses shown in the stat screen does correspond with the total of all attack bonuses we had active in each scenario. Hence, we can conclude that all attack bonuses are indeed additive within a single pool. Now, the fifth goal was to figure out if the Vanwyrm and Robinquill partner skills were additive or multiplicative. We know that at 4 stars, the partner skills are supposed to increase weak point damage by 40%. We see that the test produced a 44% difference in the 3 Gobfin scenario and a 40% difference in the 4 Gobfin scenario. So within margin of error, considering the small sample size of 32 shots, we can conclude that the Vanwyrm and Robinquill partner skills are indeed multiplicative. If they were additive, we'd be seeing a difference of closer to 10 to 15% instead of straight up 40%. And goal number 6 was to figure out how the target dummy works, what the parameters were, and we can see that the paper calculation damage values, the numbers in orange, line up extremely close with the actual average damage numbers from the 32 shots. So we can assume that the test dummy A scales to the player's level, and B has exactly 100 defense, or a defense factor of 1. The dummy also does not seem to take additional damage from elemental attacks, or at the very least, it is not weak to fire damage specifically because the Ragnarok converts my damage to fire. Thus, we can further conclude that the target dummy is a viable control test device as long as you remember that it carries an exact defense value of 100, which honestly shouldn't matter either way for pure comparison work anyway. And finally, to answer my 2 personal questions, first, running my preferred unmounted setup of 3 Gobfins, a Robinquill, and a mount works out to about 10% less damage than the theoretical max damage setup of 4 Gobfins and an elemental swap mount. Of course, this is assuming I land all my hit shots. This was surprising because I honestly expected the difference to be much larger. And for my second question, again, assuming I land all my headshots, there is only a 2% damage difference between running a Vanwyrm and running a Ragnarok. This was surprising as well, but as soon as I confirmed that the Robinquill and Vanwyrm partner skills were actually multiplicative, I kind of figured the numbers would be a lot closer than initially expected. Now, there are a few considerations when comparing weak point bonus damage to elemental swap attack bonus. First, in order to gain the benefits of using a Robinquill or a Vanwyrm, you obviously need to hit your headshots. Now, this isn't particularly hard to do in Palworld, but it is far from a 100% scenario. I'd say I land about 2/3 of my hit shots, on average. Depending on the target, of course, some pals are really small or have really small weak points, some don't even have weak points at all, as far as I can tell. The buff from the elemental swap mounts, on the other hand, is up 100% of the time as long as you are mounted, regardless of where you hit the target. Now, that said, the elemental swap effect also makes you deal a specific element of damage. So you'll have to deal with it being strong or weak or neutral against the appropriate target types. Now this of course can be solved by breeding a couple of mounts with different elements to swap around with, which is actually what I've been doing the past couple of days. I bred a beacon, which is electric damage. And finally, the additive nature of the elemental swap buff dictates that it will conclusively be the better option for folks who don't run full attack setups. The weak point buff only eclipses this damage in this experiment specifically because I personally already have 136% bonus attack before factoring in the mount buff. So diminishing returns starts becoming a problem for the elemental swap. Now all that said, I'm still pleasantly surprised that my preferred setup doesn't fall too far behind the elemental swap optimized setup. Factoring in potato aim and non-hit shots, I'd say the realistic difference will average out closer to 20% less damage. Now that's a number I can work with because supreme damage isn't exactly a necessity at this point in the game's development. Now as for the rest of the experiment, I hope this helps clear up any questions about stuff like the weak point multiplier, damage variance, how attack bonuses stack, and how the target dummy works. Over the coming week or so, I'll be looking to do some tests on alphas, among other things, to try to figure out exactly how damage reduction works with those, whether the values of 90% or 95% that are being thrown around, are those values actually accurate? And that's a wrap for today's video, folks. Thumbs if you liked it, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.